Hello and welcome to the Trial and Error podcast. My name is Austin.
And I'm Emma Grace, and we're your hosts. So welcome back. This is episode 3. Third is the best, as they say. Wait, first is the worst,
4.
second is the best, third. Oh, never mind, it's not. And it's episode 4. This is horrible. You should leave this in, though, just for the memes. Anyways, welcome back. And today is a very, very special episode because we have a very, very special guest. Both Austin and I have had our professor, Judy Cornett, for civil procedure, and she's agreed to be on today. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to talk about her a little bit and why she's so awesome and why we wanted to have her on the pod. So first off, she is an amazing woman. She is from Lenoir City, Tennessee, which is about 30 minutes from where we're recording. But Girlie's got a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, and a JD. And the PhD is in English literature, and I'm pretty sure she got her bachelor's in history. So she is a jack of all trades, someone that I think is a lifelong learner and really takes a lot of pride in that, and it really shows up in how she teaches her classes. She actually went to UT, which is where we're at for law school, and she was the chief of the Tennessee Law Review and the outstanding graduate of 1982. She's also clerked on the D.C. U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which is a super big deal, and she joined the College of Law in 1992. Since then, she's been teaching, and she mostly teaches in civil procedure. I think she also teaches a few classes on the jury system, on professional responsibility, and law and literature. But her main passion and what she writes a lot of articles about is civil procedure, so it's really awesome having a professor that real-time really cares about what she's teaching. I'd say all our professors are like that, but what really distinguishes Cornett is how much time she puts into what she's saying and why she thinks what she thinks and explaining her opinions to us. Some professors try to hide their opinions and they don't do a very good job. I'd rather have someone just come out and say, this is what I think, this is why I think it. And she is the epitome of that in a professor in the best way. I'll definitely never forget having her. She's been one of my favorite professors by far. And her articles have been published in the Ohio Law State Journal, the Alabama Law Review, and the Tennessee Law Review. So Professor Cornett, thank you for joining us today, even though I know you're more of a radio person than a podcast person.
I know that podcasts are the new genre
Yes.
of the new generation. I know that.
We appreciate you for that. So we're just going to start out by asking you what your law school experience was like and just kind of leaving the floor open for you.
Well, I had a very enjoyable law school experience. I had been a paralegal for 2 years before I came to law school because I was a liberal arts major in undergraduate school. And so, liberal arts majors graduate, and then if they're not going to graduate school, they have to find jobs. And it just so happened that a good friend of mine from undergraduate school had already gone into law school, and one of her good friends was just entering law school and leaving a job at the University of Tennessee Legal Clinic Community Office, which is now Legal Aid of East Tennessee. And so she was a paralegal. This was in the days before you had paralegal programs and paralegal certificates. And so my friend from undergraduate school who was already in law school called me and said, hey, would you like to be a paralegal? And I said, sure, that sounds wonderful. Is there a paycheck involved? And, it was good for using, a history and English major's skills of textual analysis, research, attention to detail, writing, that kind of thing. So I became a paralegal at the community office of the legal clinic, and it was really a great experience. I had never before been interested in law. I'm not sure exactly why. I had never been interested in law. Of course, there are no lawyers in my family, and I think there may have been 1 or 2 lawyers in my small town of Lenoir City. But I just never, and of course there were TV lawyers like Perry Mason, and
right.
I just had never seen myself doing that. But then when I became a paralegal, one of the great things about it was that some areas of law allow for lay representation. And I did 2 of those areas of law, which was unemployment compensation and Social Security disability hearings. So I actually represented people as a lay person before I ever represented anybody as a lawyer. And I just enjoyed it so much, and I worked with a bunch of wonderful people who were legal aid lawyers down there. So that's why I decided to go to law school. So I had that kind of background already, and I think that really eased my transition into law school. I had a lot of familiarity with the concepts, and of course I had done research in the UT Law Library as a paralegal, so I was familiar with the facilities and everything. So I enjoyed my time in law school.
More about the actual law school experience, like classes and stuff like that. What was that like?
It was really different from today, I have to say. First of all, there were a lot more of us. I think our class was like 160, 180. Wow. So my section had 60 people in it, Section 1 of the class of 1979 that entered. And so it was a lot less. I would say there was a lot less interpersonal interaction with the professors than there is now, because there just were larger classes, and it was pretty much the Socratic method. You were cold called every day and expected to answer. I know that some of the professors, particularly the younger generation of professors, were really open to interacting with the students. Some of the more senior professors, I think, were not particularly inviting, in their demeanor at least, to interacting with students. Although, of course, if you did approach them, they were happy to help you. But we were kind of a self-sufficient group. I mean, we weren't going up after class, for example, to ask questions. Nobody ever did that. So you were just more, it was more of the professor being more of a Kingsfield type distant figure when I was in law school. And of course, my section lost 50% of our people over the winter break. So we were 60 in the fall and we were 30 in the winter.
Wow.
The experience definitely wasn't for everybody.
Mm-hmm. With that, do you think that students today are missing out on some of the benefits of that? And
No.
No?
That's fair. I don't know if I would have survived in law school like that. I think now law school invites more different personality types, but there's only back then maybe a few kinds of personality types that could have really done it.
Oh, I think one of the strengths of legal education is the diversity that we have in our student body and in our professorate. Our professors are much more diverse now than they were when I was in law school. And we have more of them. We have a lower faculty-to-student ratio now, obviously, than we did back then when the faculty was smaller and the classes were bigger. But I don't think you're missing out on anything. The thing that let me say this, the thing that I really remember about my peers in law school is that we were all very supportive of one another. There was not competition amongst us in the same way that there appears to be, at least, among current students. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we were more dependent on one another. I mean, the professors were not necessarily as accessible to us, perhaps, as they are today. And so we did support one another more in terms of just material help, sharing notes, study groups, et cetera, and also just sort of psychologically. I know that in my section, there was what we called a rescue team. And so if a student got backed into a corner Socratically, there were several of us who would raise our hands maniacally, trying to attract the professor's attention to try to help out anybody who was really suffering. And so I think that, I said there was nothing about my experience that students today were missing out on, but perhaps to the extent that there was that kind of peer support, that might have been an aspect that isn't as strong today.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I'd say that the environment is super competitive, but one-on-one, it's not as competitive.
Yeah,
that makes
if
any
you
sense.
ask someone for help, they'll give it to you. I just don't think there's the initiative necessarily to go and help
there's
someone.
not a lot of initiative, but no one's going to say no to you if you asked for notes or I'm confused on this or that. But I'm also not as much of a litigator spirit. Along those lines, I know that there probably were not a ton of women in law school at that time. And you're also from Lenore City, which is a pretty small town. So I'm interested to hear, what kind of obstacles you had to go through to get your law degree.
I actually love that question because I didn't have any obstacles. I'm sorry, but I know that it might seem as though I would have obstacles because you're right. There was not a majority of women in law school as there have been for several years now in law schools nationally. There have been an equal number of women or a majority of women in law school recently. And certainly we had critical mass, though. I would say we had about a third of our students were women in law school. But, and as far as coming from a small town, I mean, I had an idyllic childhood, so I didn't have any obstacles in my life. It's very strange. I mean, I'm very fortunate, and I count my blessings every day for that. But, you know, my parents were not formally educated at all, and therefore they valued education. I was always told to get my education. I was told that it was valuable. I was always doing well in school because I enjoyed school. So I had a very intellectual environment and intellectual upbringing in my small town. And, you know, all my friends, similarly, they all valued school, and we all were good students and had ambitions that, you know, we've all luckily and very fortunately, by and large, been able to fulfill. And so when I came to college here, I was in the, I should say that I was in the initial class of college scholars in the College of Liberal Arts. And the College Scholars Program essentially helped you to write your own curriculum and write essentially a master's level thesis at the undergraduate level. And I was fortunate enough to have a tutor, if you can believe this, whom I met with, weekly, and that was Dr. Richard Marius in the history department. And oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
It was just wonderful. So I was in that program for 4 years, had all these wonderful peers, wonderful professors, Dr. Sarah Blanchet, Dr. Paul Pinckney, Dr. Alan Carroll in the English department. Just, I mean, it was like nirvana, really. And then after I graduated, I got a great job as a paralegal, and then when I came to law school, I got a very good scholarship. It was a merit scholarship. It was one of the better scholarships. And then I had gotten married right out of college, which I don't recommend, but I did that. And I had a working spouse, and who was a liberated person. You know, he, of course, obviously, he wouldn't have married a feminist if he weren't liberated, but I mean, he wasn't possessive, or he didn't in any way discourage me or try to put obstacles in my way as a career person. So I'm sorry to say that I didn't have any obstacles.
Well, I think that's a good thing. I think what I'm hearing you say is that an encouraging atmosphere and environment, and then having mentors along the way, is what makes it not have obstacles, which rings very true for us as well, I'm sure.
So we talked a little bit about your actual law school experience and what brought you there, but what made you decide you wanted to be a professor, and how did you take that route?
Well, that's a really interesting path as well. After I graduated from law school, I was fortunate enough to get a clerkship with Judge Edward Allen Tam on the D.C. Circuit. So here I go off to Washington, D.C. for a year. Of course, judges such as Antonin Scalia, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, David Bazelon, Skelly Wright, Patricia Wald. I was working alongside them, you know, in Judge Tam's chambers every day, so I was so fortunate. But then when I came back to Knoxville after my one-year clerkship, it was interesting in terms of getting a job, because people in Knoxville weren't exactly attuned to the kind of work I had done at the D.C. Circuit, which, as you know, has a very heavy administrative law caseload. But it was just as the Butcher Banks had failed, because I returned to Knoxville in August of 1983. And so I joked that the Butcher Bank failure was the Full Employment Act for the law school class of 1982, because half of us worked for the people trying to collect the notes, and the other half of us worked for the people trying to defend the notes.
Wow.
So I was able to go with a private firm at that point, working in the Butcher Bank field. I then worked for a year for Knoxville Legal Aid, which of course was my old office as a paralegal, and I worked for a year there as a staff attorney. But meanwhile, while I was doing that, I was hired as an adjunct at the University of Tennessee College of Law to teach legal process. And so in the course of teaching legal process, I said to myself, I really love this. I mean, I loved working with the students. I just enjoyed it so much to try to help them, you know, gain their skills and knowledge. But I also realized I don't really know what I'm doing. I mean, I'm doing it because I know what I'm doing, but I don't really have the foundation I want. So that's when I decided to go back to the University of Virginia to get a PhD in English, of all things. So I quit practicing law. I went back to graduate school, and I got a master's and a PhD in English from the University of Virginia. Then when I came back from that experience, I applied for a full-time teaching job at the University of Tennessee and was hired to teach civil procedure, legal ethics, and law and literature.
So not much has changed since then.
Not 30 years later, I'm still teaching the same things.
Seems like you might like it.
I love it, actually. I really love what I teach, and I love the students.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we love you too.
Oh.
But especially because we were just talking about this before. Some professors think they're really good at hiding their opinions, and they're not. As to where your teaching style is more coming forward and saying, hey, I think this because of this and this. Look how they wrote this. That's why I believe this. Like, kind of form your own opinions. And I just wanted to know, like, in your life, how did you start? You've been doing the law, but what made you actually sit down and think about how the legal system should be and help you form your own thoughts on the law?
That's a really good question, and I don't know that I can answer it very satisfactorily, because it seems as though so many of my experiences from day one have sort of gone into the hopper, so to speak, so that when I did encounter the legal system, first as a paralegal, then as a law student, then as a lawyer, I sort of already had a background that enabled me to read the law sort of against that background. You know, I think you have different orientations to the world. You know, in my orientation to the world, coming from my culture where I'm a first generation high school graduate, is basically that there are power imbalances in the world. I mean, and we're not the ones in power. Okay, that's basically the upbringing I had. And so when I began to represent poor people at legal aid, I said, oh, it's true. Mm-hmm. There really are power imbalances in the world, and these are the people who aren't in power. And so I'm helping them to use the legal system to gain some of the power and purchase that they deserve to have. And so I think that it's always been with me kind of looking for who's got the power and how are they using it, and who needs to have more power and how can we help them get it.
Yeah, and that makes sense why civil procedure is your thing too, because we've talked about before that if you want to be a good attorney, the power is in knowing how to actually sue. Like, you could talk about how to, like, what we're suing for all day, but at the end of the day, that knowledge is useless if you don't know what court you're supposed to walk into.
Yes, how to do something. It's easy to say this is what I want to do, but it's more challenging to know how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we'll find out how well we know at the end of this term. What would you tell, like, what would you want our graduating class to know about the legal system? There's one thing we take away.
The legal system is, if not the greatest, one of the greatest benefits and blessings of our country. And we are very fortunate to have the legal system that we have. Not that it's perfect, it's not perfect, but that it aims at good ideals. And it does embody some of those ideals. And we should be grateful for that. But we should always be looking for ways to make the legal system better. And we should never discount our own power and our own ability to make good change happen within the legal system. There are two different schools of thought on this too. It's that, well, you can work within the system, but if you do so, you're complicit, and you'll never make any structural changes if you stay within the existing system. The other view is, in order to improve the system at all, you have to come at it from outside and tear it down and completely rebuild it in order for it to be completely good and not have existing flaws. But I think that as a lawyer, I'm certainly more of the former school. I do think, and we've seen this, we've seen lawyers make changes within the system. And the system is designed for that in a lot of ways. There are always competing forces, however, that are always at war. I mean, that's life, isn't it? That for every motion, there's an equal and opposite, or for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right?
That was impressive considering that science was not one of your degrees.
So there are always forces at work, and you really have to evaluate what contribution you want to be making. Mm-hmm. And you have to ask yourself, am I doing day in and day out the things that I want to strive to to do in order to achieve the goals I have.
That's such a good answer, because also what I'm hearing you say is like actually reflect on what you're doing. Don't just do the law. Think about the law a little bit. And I think that's really important. Law school seems to be our time that we can actually think about what we think. But we're so busy, not everybody's doing it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm like, maybe we should take a minute. But that leads to Austin's next question.
So I came into school not having any sort of legal background. I majored in psychology and biblical studies as an undergraduate. But I did have very strong like philosophical and political beliefs, and that was part of why I wanted to go to law school. Emma Grace, on the other hand, didn't have a bunch of political or philosophical like roots that she was very passionate about when it came to legal philosophy. So how would your advice to the two different sorts of people that we are about how we ought to face challenges to the things that we're thinking in class, how would you advise us to respond when professors are saying things we disagree with or things we agree with? How do we manage the tension of having certain beliefs?
That, again, is a really good question. I think about Senator Howard Baker, who said, you ought to listen to one another because, remember, the other guy might be right. So it's important to listen. It's important to try to understand. And sometimes you can do that by asking questions. You can delve deeper into ideas that are expressed by asking questions and gaining more of a handle on the origins and the roots of different belief systems. And sometimes that is as simple as, for example, in my case, kind of a cultural background, an upbringing. In other cases, it can be purely philosophical positions. It can be life experiences that have happened to people. But trying to understand the origin and the foundation of beliefs is always a good thing to do. So there's no reason why. I mean, that's one of the great things about the academic environment generally, is it's a free marketplace of ideas. All ideas can be heard. All ideas can be expressed. All ideas can be weighed in sort of a Jeffersonian way, kind of with the ideal. Now, it is hard sometimes because sometimes there can be repetition of ideas that you've already evaluated. For example, if you hear something for the 50th time, well, you evaluated it the first 49 times and didn't adopt it. So it's hard the 50th time to hear it with an open mind, So you're not always going to be able to keep an open mind. But in those cases, if you have developed a position, a thoughtful position, you can then express yourself in a civil and reasoned way to help the other person understand your position. So I think that kind of civil dialogue is good. And, I hope my students always feel free to disagree with me. Sometimes I know I can be very dramatic in class and very theatrical in class.
That's what makes it fun.
Yeah, but I'm always open to hear other sides. For example, today I had to refer to Michael Jackson's song, The Man in the Mirror, because I was criticizing some corporations that I feel like have tried to take advantage of our system a little bit, and then I realized that I'd stopped at McDonald's on the way to school, and I shop at Walmart quite a bit, and I drive a car made by a giant corporation. So, you have to also look at yourself and be self-aware in your beliefs.
Yeah, I will say one of the things I really appreciate about the University of Tennessee generally is that I don't think I've had a professor where I haven't felt comfortable saying what I believe. And I'm on the more conservative end of like the political spectrum. And I know a lot of people, even fellow conservatives at UT, feel like they can't speak up, but I don't feel like there's been any sort of retribution from classmates or professors when it comes to saying my ideas.
What I've learned about myself through this experience is that I'm an internal processor. So I'm sitting in class and I'm not thinking, oh, that's a good point, or, oh, I don't agree with that. I'm, like, just absorbing. And then a few days later, I finally, like, have a thought. Like, it takes it a while to, like, form within me. And I'm wondering, for you in your life, it sounds like, you grew up with really great parents, but maybe you had more intellectual friends in the sense that, like, you have professors at school that you talk to. And I'm wondering, do you like to talk about law with everybody? Or is it the kind of thing where you reserve, like, refining your opinions for those that are also doing law. I'm also thinking, like, we're both married. Like, I talk to my spouse a lot about the law. I don't know if that's like a boundary you have, or like, I don't really talk about work, or if that's like the reason that you enjoy having a spouse is you get to talk about those kinds of things.
I would say that one of the great things about American democracy is that the law belongs to everybody, or it should belong to everybody. And that's been one of my interests, actually, about access to justice and also lawyer jokes. Why is it that you need a lawyer to access the system? I don't necessarily think it should be that way. I think the law, I mean, we make the law. Who makes the law? The people make the law in a democracy and in America. So I think that the law as a topic of conversation, actually, it should be more generally talked about. And I think there should be greater understanding of the law. I think the law is exciting. The law impacts people every day in countless ways. So I think that the more we talk about law, the better, because it does kind of, it recognizes that the law belongs to the people. So, yeah, I talk about law most of the time. I talk about other things too, though, obviously, but I don't just talk to lawyers about law. Mm-hmm. Although I will say this, if you want to use your analytical skills and your expressive skills in a helping way, in an altruistic way, the law is one of the best professions there is for that.
That's for sure. What advice would you give somebody that wants to start learning about the law, but they don't know where to start?
Oh, wow, what a tough question. I would say that one of the best things to do is to get some biographies of lawyers and just read about lawyers. I wrote a law review article along with one of my students, Heather Bosaw, who's now at the Knox County Community Law Office, the Public Defender's Office, about the myth of the country lawyer. And one of the things that we did in that project was to read lots of biographies and autobiographies of lawyers. And there are a number current autobiographies or biographies. I would recommend Sonia Sotomayor's autobiography, My Beloved World. I would recommend First by Evan Thomas about Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Justice Thomas has written an autobiography called My Grandfather's Son, and there are numerous other biographies and autobiographies of justices and of prominent lawyers. Jerry Spence is a very interesting lawyer, Gerry Spence. He's a very interesting lawyer who has written some books about himself, but also about some of the cases he's handled. So I would definitely start by just looking at some of the people that have been involved in the law. That's a great place to start. I wouldn't start with doctrine or rules.
PJ, personal jurisdiction.
No, that's not the place to start with the law. The place to start is with people. And it's important. The law is a human discipline. Humans make the law. Humans keep the law alive. It's a very human endeavor, which is one reason why I also teach my students about the different judges who write the opinions that we study, because you need to realize these are real people doing this, and you're going to also be a mover and shaker in the law yourselves. So it's important to realize that.
Do you have any just like parting advice or insights that you would like to share with our audience?
This is your last moment on a podcast.
Well, I'm honored to have been here. I appreciate you all asking me to come in and to participate in this new and exciting genre that is so attractive to your generation. And I would just encourage anyone who's considering a career in law at any level, whether as a paralegal, whether as a victim advocate, whether as a lawyer or a judge or a legislator, I would encourage you to pursue that, because it's such a wonderful way to self-fulfillment and to making a better society for everybody.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you. You were our first person we wanted, so
I'm honored.
You can brag about that around
we
around the
invited
school.
you before we invited our spouses.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.